review of atomic energy, the past and the present, and of course, future. What I'm going to do is uh, to quickly take all of you through a journey and narrate few important points that need to be highlighted as a part of that journey. Uh, what has been done, what has not been done, what is yet to be done, and what is it that we need to do in years to come. So that's broadly, so I think that will put the whole thing in perspective in the context of this lecture series on Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav and what do you expect to happen in the Amrut Kal. Now, atomic energy in India began uh, essentially the research had begun a bit before India became independent, but the so-called mission mode program really began after independence, and uh, the visionary who thought through this, visionary who presented this proposal to the nation, to the Prime Minister at that time, and visionary who gave shape to this Dr. Homi Bhabha, he had literally created a blueprint. And blueprint not only of the program, but I have seen him. I was very young as I entered atomic energy, and I had seen him taking great interest in the layout of buildings and the sort of town planning or architecture, as it were, for the Bhabha Atomic Research Center, and so on and so forth. So he was an architect of this program in a much broader sense than what one would normally. Now, what did he kind of spell it out for us at that time? First, of course, he came to India as the World War that broke, and then started doing research at Bangalore, and he was a name to reckon with in cosmic ray physics even at that time. But and he had the war not broken out, he would have gone back pursuing his research. So I would say it was a providential thing that war broke out. One shouldn't say this, but in the context I'm talking about, and that prevented Dr. Bhabha to return back. And then he, of course, pursued his research. Uh, he set up Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. He persuaded the House of Tatas to set that up, and it became a great center of excellence in fundamental research, physics, but also chemistry and biology. But Bhabha was a very intense person. So, like a true scientist, he started looking at, now that he was decided to stay back in India, so he started looking at, since we are a group interested in science and society, so it is this uh, the social, I wouldn't say social, but societal connect. Uh, uh, what is it that atomic energy can do for the development of this country? So he sort of chalked out. And I have seen Dr. Bhaba's papers where he was a physicist, and but yes, I've seen papers. He looked at India's energy situation. He has presented papers in Geneva conference. He looked at the correlation between development and energy access or energy availability, and also he looked at how nuclear energy would become inevitable uh, for a developed India. And he obviously was aware that, and this is, this is the period when atomic energy's full ramifications were yet to be clear. It was just evolving. Uh, and he also figured out that India doesn't seem to have much of uranium, but there is plenty of thorium. So he actually uh, sort of did detailed assessment of the three-stage strategy, what should be done, and laid that out. So he did this jotting down planet in such a great detail. But having got that clarity as to what is to be done, he always insisted that we must pursue this, although this is got to be a mission mode program, and the whole country knows atomic energy to be a mission mode program. But he said we must pursue this as a holistic science program with, of course, mission to meet national needs. So he never, uh, he in fact had a principle: find a good scientist and hire. Don't worry about whether I have a vacancy, whether I have made my structure. His only criteria: you must have good scientists. In fact, he used to say, find a scientist and build a lab around him. That was the holistic way with which he used to approach program. But his mission was clear. So that is the first thing. I think it's not very common that you have institution builders with that kind of an approach. He did create, and I'll show you the organization chart just after this, but build a comprehensive organization which kind of included uh, ex- very comprehensive research activity, comprehensive technology activity, and also several industrial operations, both done by the government institutions as well as by the public sector undertakings. And of course, you need internal services to do all these operations. So there are service organs. If you look at the verticals, which he says, no, energy, of course, was one of the important attributes. But that was not the only one. I think atomic energy program, as I will show you, it pursued energy, it pursued food and agriculture, it pursued health, industrial applications, environment, waste management, and very comprehensive program. And at that time, of course, it was not defined uh, whether India would use atomic energy for strategic purposes or not. But the option was kept open because it was not clear uh, how the security situation will evolve, how the, after the weapons came into existence, nuclear proliferation or non-proliferation treaty came into existence. It has done some good, it has also done some harm. And India, of course, uh, considered that treaty to be highly discriminatory, and so we never signed it. But we did maintain a very responsible approach in the sense so the point was, idea was to pursue research from the broadest possible perspective, keep options open, uh, uh, so that the country may choose one direction or other, but when country does choose a particular direction, the scientific input should be available to meet national needs. So the organization, of course, this structure has been evolving, but the broader blocks are more or less the same. A set of research centers like Bhabha Atomic Research Center, Indira Gandhi Center, Raja Ramanna, and these are all one broad-based center with emphasis as far as energy is concerned on thermal reactors and thorium. Indira Gandhi Center, a broad-based center with emphasis on fast reactors. Raja Ramanna Center with emphasis on lasers and accelerators. Variable energy cyclotron, essentially for cyclotron kind of accelerators to promote research. Recently, we have a new center here very close to Delhi, a global center for nuclear energy partnership. This was more to make sure that we are able to interact with the rest of the world, uh, and even in things like nuclear security, nuclear safety, and things of that kind. So a separate center was created, and of course, atomic minerals for exploration of uranium and other important minerals. Then you had companies, Nuclear Power Corporation, Indian Rare Earths, Uranium Corporation. These are all like any other public sector units in the country. The latest addition here is the Bharatiya Nabikiya Vidyut Nigam, which is building the prototype fast breeder reactor, but which will be the uh, kind of a host for the entire fast reactor program to unfold. And then there are some industrial operations which are not done uh, as a public sector company, but done directly under the government, and of course with specific purpose. For example, production of heavy water. It's a strategic material. You need to exercise control. Production of nuclear fuel. So these are all organizations which are directly, it's an industry like your ordnance factories. It's under government operations and then service sector. But it all really began with a large number of basic and fundamental research institutions. Things like Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, things like Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics, Math Science, uh, or the Tata Memorial Center, which is so these were all the autonomous institutions. They some were created after department came into existence, but some actually existed even before department came into existence, and they got into DAE fold, and they continue to remain focused on their own areas. Now, so their character is still like any other lab, if you see, and of course they have excelled in that area. Whereas these technology centers, they do the mission mode work, but the research centers do technology, and technology centers do fundamental research. One recent addition is the Homi Bhabha National Institute. You know, one of the important thing which Bhabha did was the creation of a training school. Right from day one, first institution he created was training school, and he just wanted to make sure that India should not uh, feel shortage of the required experts. So they were all homegrown. I'm also a product of training school. Now that has been extended into a university. Idea is uh, to connect basic research and the new technology, because one of the things I noticed is we're very proud that we have done this technology. When I ask a question, what is it that we have done which others have not done? Because that's the question and technology you must answer. The countries which are the leaders in technology, they have their own brand, they have their own niche area. So I said, well, what is it that we have done which others have not done? And then I found there is something fundamentally missing from our scientific research environment, from our academic environment, and that is the connect between the research at its frontiers and the cutting edge technology which emerges from that research at the frontiers. And so we created the Homi Bhabha National Institute, of course, to again take research in the most broad-based manner, but to promote, we talk about interdisciplinary research, but this is to look at the interface between basic research and technology, because that is what will create the distinctive or distinguishing feature. So, atomic energy is a fairly diverse, fairly complex organization, and so it just I want to, as I said in the beginning, take stock of what has happened with you. So I think the simple thing to take stock is to take a look at the milestones that have happened. And I'm not going to read all of them here, but you would notice that, uh, uh, right from day one, and that's why you see Dr. Bhabha in that picture at the top left hand. And this is the time when they were discussing building of Apsara reactor. And these are all people who, uh, see, they were, design of reactor was not Bhabha's domain. But there are people, they were all, with paper and pencil, uh, doing detailed work. And that's how Apsara came into existence. There was no reactor in this part of the world at that time. But this reactor was indigenously built at that time, except the fuel had to be brought from UK because we didn't have any fuel at that time. But then the experience kept on building. Once we are clear that, well, we can now build research reactors, the question was, now what do we do about generating electricity? Now, so there are two parts. One was self-reliance required. You choose a reactor type which can be built within the country, developed and built within the country. But there is also another challenge, and the challenge is, these reactors, even the early reactors in those days were something like 150 megawatts, 200 megawatts, and so on. And that capacity of a power plant was a bit too much for Indian grids in those days. So the question is, you want to put such reactor for a commercial deployment, we must see what it means doing, is it practical to put a large unit in our grids, get that experience, and that turned out to be very, very valuable. So so Dr. Bhabha, he actually, because of the self-reliance was the key driving principle all along. He decided to get Tarapur boiling water reactors done on a turnkey contract. You raise tender, get the quotations. Imagine the person who insisted, but he says, no, I want to see what it means running such reactors in Indian grids. So while that was being done, he also decided that no, but we must have our own indigenous source of uranium, because if you don't have uranium, what reactor or nuclear energy we are talking about? The question is the explorations till that time, and that happens to be so even till now. We have uranium, we found plenty of uranium after we suffered shortage during my tenure, but it's all low grade. And so Jadugoda mine, uh, which is 0.06% uranium. And in those days, such a ore would not be even, for example, the tailings of many uranium mines was actually a higher concentration than the ore grade here. So it absolutely made no sense to set up a mine there, because it was known that that uranium will be so expensive. The point I'm trying to drive is that the same leader who decided to get a reactor bought on a turnkey contract uh, decided to open a uranium mine which was quite clear is commercially not viable. But that is because his fundamentals were very strong. He knew that while in terms of looking at economics of uranium, this is not viable. If you look at in terms of economics of power, he knew that the cost of fueling in nuclear reactors is negligible. So even if it goes uh, maybe a few times higher, it doesn't make much difference for the cost of electricity. And he went ahead. Uh, I don't know if the uh, finance and audit framework of the kind we have today had been there, I think this probably would not have happened. Or maybe Dr. Baba would have succeeded overcoming them, either one of the two. But I think that was the practical self reliance that I wish to highlight. But he continued, as I told you, he did talk about or in fact, did design the three-stage program. And then there was the detailed investigation as to what should be the kind of reactor for the first stage in India. And quite when there is a lot of work going on to set up these BWRs in collaboration with Americans, the choice was that the reactor for India would be the heavy water reactor, pressurized heavy water reactor, which a commercial unit was not built at that time. They had a demonstration reactor, I think 60 megawatts or thereabouts, and Douglas Point, which is a 200 megawatt unit, which of course they shut down later, that was under construction. And it is at that time India decided that. So that point onwards, a collaboration was set up with Canadians to build heavy water reactors in India, particularly Rajasthan Unit 1 and 2, in collaborative mode and not in a commercial buyouts. Now, consistent with that, of course, human resource development, as I mentioned earlier, was an important emphasis and continues to be so. So, Dr. Bhabha had set up training school, which is the main source for the talent pool that we have in atomic energy. But now we have, as I mentioned, the Homi Bhabha National Institute to promote research at the cutting edge. And also, we did set up institutions like NICER, which is equivalent of a NICER, same kind of program at Bhubaneswar. But more importantly, we also have a center of excellence in basic science set up with Mumbai University, which essentially replicates what NICER is, but in an existing university, and which is much more difficult, much more challenging, because you have old people, old habits, and you want to do new things. So there is a problem. but you can do at one tenth the cost. And more importantly, because of that, you can actually rejuvenate the old universities. And this has happened. Bombay University this year NAC grading, it has got a NAC grading which is highest in the state of Maharashtra. Now, I'm not saying that it has happened because of this, but rejuvenation of these universities are important. And I think this CEBS has played a great role in that regard. Now, the self-reliant DAE R&D, now, certainly do R&D, I do an experiment here, I do a technology transfer there. I just want to, I just picked it up from the dashboard which is available on DAE website. And so in the month of December 2022, we generated something like 3,900 million units or 3.9 billion units of electricity. And if you multiply by 12 and see total, it will be roughly 3% of the electricity that we have in the country. In terms of health care, something like 5 lakh patients visits between January to August 2019, primarily at Tata Memorial Hospital. In terms of agriculture, something like 25 tons of breeder seeds. Now, breeder seeds you used to multiply that into the foundation seed, and that foundation seed you used to again multiply that into certified seeds, which go to market. And this is essentially in oil seeds and pulses. So you can imagine the contribution atomic energy research has made in the area of oil seeds and pulses. Both are still in short supply. We are still import dependent on that. On the radio pharmaceutical front, again, there is a comprehensive program. Of course, countries' requirements are even larger. So they are setting up a reactor dedicated to production of radioisotopes now. There is a much larger commercial activity on industrial isotopes. In terms of technologies, for example, 6 months in 2009, 48 technologies were transferred. So it's a technology powerhouse. Several technologies, not much known, but it gets transferred. In terms of publication, again, the record is very high. In fact, Nature Index 2022, it ranked Homi Bhabha National Institute, which is the prime apex research body in DAE. It ranked HBNI at the top in physical science in the country. So not many people know this, but so there is a huge quantity of body of research, but there is also that level of excellence. Also, in terms of NIRF ranking, HBNI as a research institution is ranked at number 11 in the country, and as a university, it's ranked at number 17. So clearly, it's one of the better universities in the country. But that is on the research and academic. On technology front, for example, the pressurized heavy water reactor, which was chosen, developed, and we've gone through a lot of struggle. It doesn't happen overnight. But look at the Kaiga Unit 1 holds the record for second longest, and that is 962 days, uninterrupted operational run. And in fact, at some stage, for some time, it was holding number 1 position. But then another reactor sort of took over. NPCIL reactors have operated without interruption for more than a year, 42 times. So that's the operational record. We have that habit of Ghar ki murgi dal barabar. So anything comes from abroad must be great. But on one side difficult technology, on one other side developed when there was embargo, there are restrictions in supplies, but that is the level of performance. And of course, on heavy water, which is again a very strategic and important material, we are the biggest producer of heavy water in the world. So I thought I'll use this dashboard to, and this is there in public document. So to say that, well, where we are. So that much about uh, past. Now, what is happening now? Now, today we have something like 6,780 megawatts operational capacity, which everybody knows. There are units under construction, which will add roughly an equivalent capacity. So it's only a matter of time when these projects get completed and the capacity will reach 13,000 megawatts. And then there is recently government had sanctioned 10 700 megawatt units in fleet mode, and that work is going on. And along with that, two VVR units were also sanctioned. So by 2031, one should expect the capacity to reach 22,480 megawatts. Now there may be delay here and there, so give few years here and there, but you will have that capacity because the sanctions are in place, work is ongoing. And then there are several approved sites which our work are planned, and that includes several reactors to be set up under international cooperation. Now that, whatever was discussed with the Russians, that work is progressing, but whatever was discussed with French and Americans, that unfortunately it is that uh, I think the closure for that discussion is yet to be seen, and primarily it's a matter of cost. Anything you do in Western economy, the cost of living there is high, so anything made there in high-tech area is way and a few times more expensive than if you do the same thing here. And the condition is that it should be economically competitive. So that is where that problem is. And the only way to resolve that would be to do larger value addition within the country. But let us see what happens. But otherwise, I think we should get on with domestic program. Now, but this will still, even if all of it gets realized, will still reach around 50,000 megawatts, 60,000 megawatts. So that is the current plan. Now, if you look at future, but it will be clear that this is very, very inadequate compared to India's needs. It may look at how we'll achieve this, and obviously we must find ways of achieving this, and it can be done. For example, France had added 63 gigawatts between 1979 and 2000. China has added 43 gigawatts between 2002 and 2019. So there is experience, and I'll show even globally, uh, very high CAGRs have been achieved in capacity addition, not only in nuclear, but provided we do this. There's no use saying you are scientists, so you people do, and then you say you know nothing. It requires many more things to be looked at it. So, but I'll come to that. So let me come to future. Now we are now talking about uh, global warming. There is a global agreement on net zero. Uh, World wants to reach net zero by 2050, which is very close to the India's centenary or the Amrut Kal as we're talking about. So, and of course, we have set our target at 2070. But whichever way it is, there is now global uh, understanding, agreement, and also to some extent commitment, which I hope will fructify, to reach net zero. Now, this is where the key is. See, by the time we reach net zero, that is, whether it is 2050 or 2070 or something, the economy is growing. If the economy is growing, there will be demand for electricity. And there is a direct relationship between the call it economic growth or electricity and the quality of life the people can have, the standard of living, and so on. And to me, you want to see India as a developed country, I would say single line definition is the standard of living of Indians should be comparable with the best in the world. Then I will say India is developed. It's as simple as that. Now that would mean not India becoming the topmost economy. That would mean per capita income in India comparable with best in the world, and there is a huge difference between the two. But leave that aside. But if you look at this correlation, so we are talking about getting Human Development Index comparable to those blue triangles, the countries with high quality of life. Now let us look at the minimum of that, the threshold to reach there. Now that in total energy terms, I'm not talking about electricity alone, total energy. Total energy term, that is at around 2,400 kilogram oil equivalent per person. Now, so we should create access to energy at least to that level. Now one can say that, look, we are talking about clean energy, electricity, there will be energy efficiency. So you can do some rough checks and say that because of that addition, you can achieve the same standard of living even if you are able to reach something like 1,400 kilogram oil equivalent per year. But at least that you must reach. Multiply that with the population at that time, or maybe the stabilized population of India, you will end up at the number something like 28,000 terawatt hours per year. Now, currently, India's energy consumption is around 28,000 terawatt hours per year. So we have to go from 6,500 to 28,000 terawatt in this period. Now, and this is achievable. That's a CAGR of 4.78%. So if you put our act together, no big deal, according to me. The question is, how do you get that energy which is clean? Because you can't make use of oil, coal, things like that. And I'm going to summarize that. Will ultimately you will not be able to. You will have to take recourse to that at least to some extent. Now, total assessed renewable energy potential in India, according to paper by Professor Sukhatme quite some time back, is at around 5,800 or 5,900 terawatt hours. Now that included a much smaller contribution from biomass, because biomass, most of the energy is non-commercial even today. Now I have looked at that also, and if you make a good job of that, particularly accounting for the 2G technology for bioenergy and all, you can add another 2,500 terawatts. So it comes to something like you may end up 8,000, 9,000. Somebody say, no, but you can go offshore and there is a much higher wind potential. add another 2,000-3,000 terawatt hours. Somebody says, no, 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 this is a wrong estimate. Another 3,000-4,000 terawatt hours you add. You don't reach 28,000 terawatt hours. So this is simple arithmetic. Now, you don't require great analysts to do this. The question is now tell me where the rest of the energy will come from. And so my simple answer is either you have to take recourse to nuclear in a massive way or decide to remain underdeveloped. I think there are no two ways about it. So this is the perspective with which I think we should talk about development of atomic energy in the country. Now, some people say, no, 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 but nuclear is expensive. Now, see, if I talk about an isolated plant, for example, a solar or a wind, uh, a standalone plant, clearly the cost is cheaper. And that is how all the bids are done and all. But that is not the price at which the electricity comes to your home through the grid. Because grid has to be maintained stable. The input output in the grid has to always match. Now, there is always a problem in the grid because the load side is variable. But supply side normally with coal and with gas balancing, hydro, nuclear, you have a very stable supply, dispatchable electricity. With the proportion of variable renewable energy going up, you have a variable factor on the supply side, you have a variable factor on the demand side. So the ratio between peak capacity requirement and the average or energy delivered, that is decided, it has bound to go much higher than what is the requirement today. And that means additional investment. And when you have that additional investment, there will be a reasonable period of time that investment will be dead because it won't be productive. And somebody will have to pay for it. Now, that addition is not insignificant. For example, there is this, of course, we got it done at IIT Bombay also, but this is a study done by MIT, and this is also there in the OECD NEA report. Now, as you approach net zero, and if that approach is only through variable renewable energy, the cost will climb up that hill. So the key lies in remaining away from that hill. So approach net zero bypassing that hill, as is shown in the curve on the left hand side. You want to do that, there has to be a minimum fraction of nuclear, not minimum, sizable fraction of, because nuclear is the only baseload option available now. You can't use coal, you can't use any other thing. Now, if you factor that in, at least that MIT report, it says that the minimum average generation cost at low emission without nuclears, if you say no nuclear, then they study in the New England region of USA, it showed that minimum cost will become twice. And in a TBT region in China, the study says it will become 4 times. So I think to say that renewable energy is cheap is a partial truth. And we should not hide it from the taxpayers. So that's the important point. How much would be the proportion of nuclear? The study says the nuclear capacity as a percentage of peak demand for the US New England region, the optimum is at around 60%. And in China, TBT region, the optimum is around 80%. How much it will be for Indian case? Make your guess. So it's not just the question of sustainability and availability of energy supply, even cost The real economics, if you look at it, it will say that we need to, the recourse to nuclear is unavoidable. So to me, future, these are the technologies that are important for the green energy future of our country. So wind, solar, importantly, not just solar photovoltaic, but also solar thermal. And even here, we raise tenders and the bids come very expensive. So say solar thermal not viable. Now, solar thermal bids come expensive because those are all custom designed in Western countries. And there is much more customized activity in solar thermal than photovoltaic. Photovoltaic is a mass manufactured. Now, why can't one create a product in India which, when done in India, such customized activity would become cheaper? 2, 3 times attempts have been made, but every time somebody thought we must have a collaboration. And so either it failed at the bid stage, a few which crossed at the bid stage, but I think the actual implementation, it didn't go very far. So that is, we want somebody to come here and set up their own technology, and we want to be like, as if we are holding purse and buy from somebody. And that in technology things, it doesn't work. And you can't become a technology superpower with such an attitude. Anyway, nuclear, luckily that is not the case, but these are bachas, chota players, don't know the commercial world and so on. But having said that, the key elements that I would like to suggest, and now what I'm telling you is I'm not a spokesperson of Department of Atomic Energy. So these are my own ideas. I, of course, take full responsibility, but I'm not carrying anybody's bid here. To me, it looks electricity, hydrogen, and bioenergy. They are going to be the key feeders for meeting energy demands. Now, we must, according to me, reserve the bioenergy, particularly in the form of compressed biogas, for cooking energy. Because today we are, rightly we have emphasis on clean cooking energy from the air quality, particularly in kitchen, which is very important. But you can't do that in a net zero thing because, of course, gas is much cleaner than coal and oil, but not consistent with net zero. On the other hand, that compressed biogas or bio CNG, that is fully consistent with net zero, and it is safe enough to be used in kitchens, both rural as well as urban. And so, and luckily we have that kind of a biomass. So I think on preference, we should reserve that sector for residential sector and to some extent to run agricultural machinery. We must emphasize decentralized renewables because, as I said, that is cheap. So for rural and remote areas where microgrids can be made use of, and that is absolutely a right option to pursue. So that I think must be emphasized. We must develop and deploy solar thermal and high temperature nuclear reactors because they are needed for production of hydrogen directly. See, today we are all talking about producing hydrogen through electrolysis. Now you produce electricity to something, then produce hydrogen, you are going through two energy conversions. So obviously it cannot compete with a direct production of hydrogen, and this technology is available though at lab scale. And I think that it will take some time. So initially we may have to continue with electrolyzed hydrogen. But very soon one should catch up and produce hydrogen directly through thermochemical splitting of water. And then, of course, electricity will become the main, for not just domestic, commercial, transportation, industry. It will be higher share. So today we have something like 1,600 terawatt hours of electricity. That the grid system is of that size. That will need to be expanded up to maybe 10,000 terawatt hours per year. Now, I told you 28,000 is the total electricity. Normally, share of electricity, for example, today the share of electricity in terms of as a fraction of total energy is around 20%. Now, as far as the clean energy transition is concerned, all sources available to us today primarily they are producing electricity. Solar produces electricity because we don't emphasize on thermal. Wind produces electricity, hydro produces electricity, nuclear produces electricity. So, which would mean that electricity will occupy nearly full share of the total energy supply, and then whatever other uses we want to convert. For example, you want to carry out some chemical operations or reduction, steel production. So you convert electricity to hydrogen, hydrogen to that process, or do something directly with hydrogen. Same thing about transportation, same thing about other. So if, for example, we are not successful in uh, direct splitting of water, thermochemical splitting of water, then out of 28,000 terawatt hours, 25,000 terawatt hours will have to be part of electricity, then convert. So 25 divided by 28, that will be the share of electricity in the total. And that compare with 1600. So we are talking about something like 17, 18 times the current electricity system. That much it has to grow. And I think one need to think through what this means. And of course, the question is, as I told you, if these things don't happen because these numbers don't really add up properly, then I think the inevitable thing is to continue to use fossil energy, and then back it up with carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. Of course, it will add to the cost one will have to pay. So that is the scenario in which one needs to look at nuclear. Now, where are we today? So today's plans are that, well, first of all, we have this 700 megawatt heavy water reactor as a good workhorse, and large number of them are under construction. Uh, and they have been built with, I would say, in terms of time frame and all. Of course, the 700 are yet to be built, but the 500, which is almost the same kind of reactor, has been built with comparable gestation period, as that red bar there it will show. The two out of three, two of them are for Tarapur units, Tarapur 3 and Tarapur. Also, in terms of their performance and all, hey, what they are doing well. So we have a technology, we have a workhorse. The question is, you have to create so many of them and do it in quick time. Luckily, we have this fleet mode approval for fleet mode construction of 10 units, which is a good thing. I recommend that we must take up 3 more such fleets, and it may not be possible to be done only by one organization. So you require multiple organizations. Luckily, NTPC is taking interest in coming forward. So we need that, there is also this question of, finding the finance, the low cost finance. And I think this has an economic case. It will produce its own wealth. It has a viability. But the question is, uh, that does not necessarily mean that it has to be done purely in private sector. France has been done, and good part of that is there is a very negligible share of private sector there. It's all done in government, and that is the most shining example of how things were done. So, so I think there is something that needs to be clear before such. But you require more implementing agencies. You require largish policy, and these are not things which can be done by DAE. These are way beyond that. But I do hope that that would happen. We should also emphasize on export, because when you have factories deployed, the factories have to be continuously busy, and if there are ups and downs in the domestic supply chain, an export allows you to balance. It also creates your brand image. There is also this issue about several coal plants retiring, and one can make use of those sites because there is transmission system available there, water available there. Uh, Good part of electrical system can be made use of, and a railway line is available for transportation. So the small modular reactors could be designed to suit Indian conditions and leverage the sites available there. So it will be a marginal addition. These cannot really make up the kind of numbers we want, but certainly there is an advantage. So we should make use of that. Uh, Provided you can guarantee safety, because this will be now closer to public, closer to uh, denser population. So these reactors have to be of a type which will assure that there will be no impact in public domain, even in a bad accident. And such reactors have been designed. In India itself, we have an advanced heavy water reactor which is fully qualified. Unfortunately, no construction has been taken up. But I think we need to develop such systems and deploy. So the question is, can net zero thrust accelerate nuclear power? Now, ulta. Now that there is such a, will this now give thrust to nuclear power? We have to wait and see what really happens. But if you see that this is the global deployment of evolution of worldwide nuclear power from IAEA database, and you would notice that between the date NPT came into existence and Chernobyl happened, when the things really slowed down, the global nuclear capacity grew at a massive 19% CAGR. Not many people realize that it grew at that fast a pace. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should grow nuclear at 19% CAGR, and it's not required. But such things are possible. I told you it has happened in France, it has happened in China, but it has happened on a global scale as well. Now, if you look at the current trend, the bar chart below, you would notice that the dark blue are the reactors under operation, and the light blues are the capacity, sorry, not reactors, the capacity under construction. And you will see where the construction program is really sort of on a larger scale. It is Asia, Far East, Central and Eastern Asia, and Middle East and South. So these are the countries. So the fulcrum or the focus or the center point is no longer the West. It is closer to us. And of course, as I said, these are the areas where actually there is the deficit of getting the human development index to the best possible level. So clean energy transition would need unprecedented increase in the size of electricity system in the country, as I said. Nuclear energy is inevitable in India for realizing net zero and development goal together. Otherwise, as I said, you have to choose one, not both. Necessary high growth rates have been achieved in past. The question is whether India can put its act together. Now, let me take you even beyond net zero. Net zero doesn't mean that energy requirements of the country will stop. Those requirements will, so we will have to keep looking at access. So that's where I think the three-stage nuclear power program, the thorium, they all remain as relevant and important today as they were earlier. It's only that because of net zero, we need to accelerate the first phase, which was actually supposed to be a small phase really in three-stage logic. And so we need to carry out this development of a host of reactor technologies and related reprocessing technologies, not just fission reactors, but also fusion reactors. So, and these are all really long-term programs, but I think the program has to continue because as you find, as we move ahead of time, nuclear will become more and more important. And as you would notice, renewable energy is a fixed term. That number is not going to increase. Whereas human beings' energy requirements will keep rising. So all that additional has to come from nuclear. There is no other choice. So these are some of the hard realities that one needs to realize. So with that, that's the future. I want to close by making some additional remark, which I have not discussed sufficiently, but I think are important. So I'll just read them out and close my lecture. So as I said, nuclear is inevitable for global energy security. It's not just India's case. India's case is clear, but except for some small countries or countries like Brazil, where large landmass, huge hydro potential, that's a different story. But otherwise, I think it seems to be unavoidable. Uh, for global energy security as well as dealing with climate change threat, a climate change threat, in my mind, is a risk greater than nuclear security risk eventually. India can now be a part of the solution and contribute because we have the technology, we have rightly placed, and there is, I think, India can really leverage a lot of advantage on the global scene by doing so. So accelerated nuclear power deployment, similar to what has happened in past, is the need of the hour. And this needs integrated government level action, not a departmental level action. There is no empirical evidence, and many people say, but what about safety? What about radiation? Suffices to say that there is no empirical evidence that is statistically relevant to support the existence of harmful effects of low dose and low dose rate radiation exposures. You look at the Hiroshima Nagasaki bombing and the studies then, you look at Chernobyl after effects, you look at Fukushima after effects. Nowhere there are detailed studies done by professionals, and there is no evidence of. High dose is a different story, but at low dose, what we are talking about. There is a need to reflect this in the radiation protection standards. So I think the nuclear professionals, there are Puritans, so we can do better. So we have high, but then when it comes to creating trauma in public mind, the same thing hits back, and so we need some correction there. Recycle essential to resolve the issue of permanent disposal of long-lived radioactive waste. Now, this is another problem which the community has created. For fear of diversion of materials to weapons purposes, uh, a good part of international community has banned reprocessing. Now, if you ban reprocessing, you dispose spent fuel as spent fuel. They are all under IAEA safeguards. So under IAEA safeguards, there is nothing like permanent disposal. There is only a retrievable disposal. So you are talking about creating repositories where you can deposit, but you should be having the ability to go there and always see that it is there. Now, smaller countries cannot do this. So In fact, I have been saying this for decades now, that disposal of spent fuel as spent fuel is an unresolved issue and will remain as such. And I've said this in IAEA, and people just keep quiet and leave it outside the obstum. But that's a hard reality. So it's a catch 22 legal knot that has been created, and we need to untangle that or resort to reprocessing. And anyway, safeguard system is there, so one can do reprocessing to address this. There is an intermediate solution, and that is you leverage thorium. You put thorium in your fuel cycle, and then there is a proliferation concern decreases quite a bit. So you can have this interim storage for some time till you are ready for reprocessing. And because there is uranium 233 or uranium 232 daughter panel, so that will not allow this proliferation to be such a big problem. So if you have total nuclear disarmament, that would enable much larger nuclear contribution for the development of the country. So with that, I thank you. Thank you very much.
I want to begin with profusely thanking Professor Anil Kakodkar. It would have been very interesting for all of you. For me, it has been a 1 hour of nostalgia trip because I began my career in physics. And most of the things, most of the facilities you're talking about, I have at least seen them. I was a proud recipient of DAE fellowship for my PhD. And for getting that fellowship, I think I was interviewed at Yacht Club. And that time they also took us to Trombay to show Apsara. Many of these facilities that, in fact, all of us, because a nation needs to know what is happening in the technology and science. And all these facilities are worth seeing. And they do take people there if you want to. I mean, I have gone for a trip to Tarapur. It's worth going there. And the question of spent fuel that he was raising towards the end of, you should see the lakes that have to be built to keep the fuel, and that has to be permanently kept. So I have, amongst my mentors, I have had amongst the first graduates of the training school. So for me, it was a extraordinary experience listening to him. The other point I want to make is that there's this famous anecdote that when the first nuclear fission was done in 1945 in Mexico, and this Oppenheimer, when he saw that flash, he was reminded of, he actually recited that shloka from the Vishwarup Darshana in the Bhagavad Gita, the 11th chapter, where the Divi Sahasrasya Bhavet Yugpadotpasthita. And of course, that shloka is that if there were 1,000 suns were to rise together, the effulgence of Vishnu, that they will not be able to compete with. And this was what he was reminded of. But what he was seeing, Oppenheimer himself, we know it was a small atomic bomb. And even one Surya will be billions of times the energy of that bomb that he was seeing. But the question is not of the numbers. The question is that when the physicists see the extreme phenomena of nature, they see it, the kind of fission we do, they see the phenomena of large distances, they see the phenomena of extraordinarily micro phenomena. They are reminded of the truths of creation that India has recorded it in its literature. And in the process, they also get some darshana that India has been trying to, has been advising us, showing us the path to get. I can tell you for sure that the physicists, when they work in their labs or in their equations, they actually do get that nearness to the spiritual or to the gods themselves. And Professor Kakodkar is amongst those very few people who have had this darshana. We know at least 2 times in the first peaceful nuclear explosion, second nuclear explosion. Both times he was involved, and the persons, we are blessed that he has addressed us today, because he is both a scientist and somebody who has had the opportunity to see the depths of the spiritual depth that India teaches. So we are thankful and we are blessed. Okay. Now let me raise another issue of this nuclear energy, about which he has told us in great detail. Fortunately, we are living in a very interesting time. There's nothing like war to concentrate minds. And the war which is going on now has concentrated attention on nuclear energy in a very big way in the world. Of course, he is very well aware of it. What he was telling us, it's becoming absolutely clear that this idea of having net zero energy without nuclear, it is not possible. But there was resistance to nuclear because of Chernobyl, then much more after Fukushima. But in the last 6 or 8 months, that resistance in the world seems to be collapsing. There's a recent report which says that after Fukushima, there were 80% of the Japanese in a survey said they want no part of nuclear energy. And when this survey is repeated now, there are 11% who say they want no part of nuclear energy. And Japan, which had gone to about 30% of their energy production through nuclear, and then it came to almost zero. Now they're restarting their nuclear plants. And same with France, they'd gone up to 70%, and I think they were down to about 50%. Now even those plants which they were planning to retire, and those they were planning to close down in order to for maintenance, they don't have the possibility for one, and they've changed their mind. So this is the time to think about nuclear as an essential component of India's energy mix. And as he said, we have our nuclear contribution to our energy consumption is about 3%, which is maybe somewhere near that only, maybe a little more than that. And as Japan has had 30%, they go back to 30%. France had 70%, they'll go back to 30%. But in any case, as he has repeatedly, strongly emphasized, there's no energy scenario without a significant contribution of nuclear energy. And what I was expecting today was some roadmap where it has been decided that we are reaching up to this point in the next year, 10 years, and about the next 20 years. He told us about that fleet reactors, but I'm hoping that there's more being thought about, and obviously it cannot be told to us, the lay people. Something will be going on. And I will make one more comment, and then I'll close this, my concluding remarks. We hold these lectures in the ICSR, through the ICSR. basically is an exercise in social sciences. And whatever last time Dada Krishnanji told us and what he has told us, today Kakodkarji has told us, it is a very strong social science dimension. There's an obvious thing, there's this calculations of economics of nuclear energy is much more a social science issue than the issue of DAE. But then there's more to it. And unfortunately, I think we don't do much of it in there'll be specialized institutions which will be doing this. But as a general part of social sciences, we don't do this kind of analysis, which should be done. More than that, the story that he has told us today, story of how Bhabha started, what was the kind of vision he had. I remember one part of the story that he was telling, that when I started doing social science, one of the books on sociology of science that I read talked about the differing vision of TIFR and of, say, CSIR. And one of the important components of it was that Bhabha was insistent, and Kakodkarji mentioned this today, that unless he finds a person, he'll not build a building. That he has to first find a appropriate scientist and then create a structure around him. The example which was talked about was of Obaid Siddiqui, that till he did not find Obaid Siddiqui, he did not start biology in TIFR. So that's one way of building. The other is to build the lab first and then see where the scientists will come from. Now, this is an entirely social science question, that the different ways of building science or building technology, we are doing very little about this, about studying that what are the different ways of building technology, what is the impact it has on the society, what the different ways what kind of impact they will have. We are doing very little of it, and there's a really fertile big field of social science which is available to us, and which I hope the social scientists of India will take up. And then, of course, the story that he has recounted, or the story that Radhakrishna recounted to us, Radhakrishnanji recounted to us, is also the story of India. And those stories have to be written down. In the world, there's literature produced on these kind of things. That how different institutes came up, how different personalities came up. And they have various correlations with the history of the country, with the sociology of the country, with the psychology of the country. I think we should begin paying attention to that kind of social science. There's a very big field, and I hope now we have a literature person as our member secretary. We hope that we will start moving this direction. Sociology of science started in India. Some level it seems to have come to nothing. Now it hardly much is being done. At least that of what I know of social sciences, there's hardly. And finally, what I mentioned about Oppenheimer, and there is this relationship between science and spirituality, which Manya Murlimnor Joshiji has been exploring and talking about, but it's not Joshiji alone. There are, in fact, we did a book, compiled a book of his lectures, and those lectures are all over the world that he gave, and everywhere in the world, people want to listen to it, and there are people who know about it in Mongolia, in Russia, everywhere there are people. I think that is another direction which the social scientists in India have to explore, because there India has what is called first mover advantage in that kind of work. We are the source of spirituality, and we are the country which should explore this relationship between science and spirituality, not to the exclusion of either one of them, but how both of them help each other, how both of them build on each other, how one follows from the other. Those kind of questions we should look into. Once again, let me thank you very sincerely, and I hope in the next year we'll be looking at science and technology from social science perspective a little more, which perhaps you will like to do us to do. Thank you very much.